Let me tell you something wild. If you think modern college life is chaotic, stressful, or a little questionable, medieval university life would have eaten you alive. Forget lecture halls, cozy dorm rooms, and campus cafes. The very first universities were closer to legal war zones, filled with riots, drunken brawls, violent punishments, and academic pressure so intense it made grown men faint. And if you enjoy uncovering the real, unfiltered truth about medieval life, the stuff textbooks skip, feel free to like this video and subscribe. It helps more people find these forgotten stories, and it lets me keep making deep dive histories just like this one. Now, the shocking part, these weren't back alley schools or fringe institutions. These were the prestigious centers of learning that shaped Western civilization. Places like Oxford, Bologna, and Paris. Today we picture them as quiet, candlelit halls of wisdom. But the reality was so much louder, dirtier, and more dangerous. In the next few minutes, we're going to pull apart the myths and reveal the real medieval student experience. The part your school textbooks never dared to mention. And later in this story, I'll reveal the grueling examination ritual that was so terrifying it pushed some students to the edge of physical collapse. But first, let's step inside a medieval university. And yes, hold your breath. It's not going to smell like parchment and wisdom. Imagine a medieval town in the 1200s. Narrow streets, market stalls, mud everywhere, the sound of bells echoing through the square. Now imagine hundreds, sometimes thousands, of young men pouring into this city, most of them between the ages of 13 and 20. They've left home for the first time, they have very little parental oversight, and they suddenly live in a world where Latin is the law, street fights are common, and knowledge is quite literally power. That was the medieval university. Not a campus, but an organism. No walls, no gates, no campus police. The school was the entire town, and its students were a force of nature the locals both needed and deeply feared. At Bologna, the students actually ran the university. They paid their professors directly, fined them for starting lectures late, and demanded refund clauses if the teaching wasn't good enough. At Paris, the church ran the institution, meaning students lived under monastic discipline, but without any of the self-control monks were expected to have. And at Oxford, well, Oxford was the equivalent of a keg party built on top of a powder keg. But in all places, medieval student life began with the same jarring realization. You are on your own, and nobody is going to protect you. Picture this. You're 16 years old. You arrive in a crowded medieval town with nothing but a few coins, a wax tablet, a worn cloak, and a letter that proves you're here to study. You have no assigned housing, no schedule, no advisor, and no idea where to go. You find lodging the same way you'd find a tavern, by wandering until someone opens a door. Most students squeezed into makeshift hostels, attics, rented rooms above taverns, or cramped wooden barracks run by local landlords, known for overcharging and under-maintaining everything. And because no one enforced regulations, landlords packed students like livestock. A single attic might house 12 boys. One straw mattress might sleep 3. The air was thick with smoke from nearby hearths, sweat, unwashed clothes, and the damp odor of medieval timber that never fully dried. Students cooked in the same room they studied in. They relieved themselves in chamber pots that emptied into the street. They rehearsed Latin chants late into the night, while drunken neighbors shouted at them to quiet down. And if you're thinking, this sounds awful, remember, This is the calm part of the medieval university experience. Let's talk about behavior. These students didn't spend their evenings quietly studying under candlelight with monastic discipline. They were far more likely to be drinking heavily, arguing loudly in Latin, playing dice, starting street fights, disrupting church services, pulling pranks, vandalizing property, getting into armed conflicts with townspeople. Yes, armed conflicts. Medieval students carried weapons, knives, clubs, sometimes even swords, because universities often operated as their own legal territories. If a student committed a crime, local authorities weren't allowed to arrest him. Only the university could judge him. And the university was notoriously lenient. Students knew this, and many acted like it. Oxford had so many violent student incidents that townsfolk used to say, "A scholar's knife is as quick as his tongue." One chronicler wrote that medieval students were prone to sudden rage, arrogant in speech, and quick to violence. This wasn't an insult, it was an accepted reality. And then there were the town versus gown riots, some of which escalated into full-scale battles. Let me show you how bad it could get. In 1355, two Oxford students got into an argument with a tavern keeper over the quality of the wine. Words turned into fists. Fists turned into weapons. And by nightfall, over 1,000 students and townspeople were fighting in the streets. By the end of the riot, 63 students were dead. The university suspended operations. Oxford nearly collapsed entirely. This wasn't a one-time thing. Riots were a recurring pattern at medieval universities. Students in Paris famously fought the King's Guards. Students in Bologna battled landlords. At Padua, professors had to flee town because students threatened them with force. You want to know what university discipline looked like? It looked like a medieval city hoping students wouldn't burn it down. And by the way, if you've made it this far, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Did anything about medieval student behavior surprise you? Or were you already expecting this level of chaos? Your comments help shape future topics, and I read every single one. So, when did they study? Surprisingly, constantly. Under all the noise, danger, and chaos, medieval universities were academic pressure cookers. Students studied grammar, rhetoric, logic, mathematics, astronomy, music theory, theology, law, medicine. They memorized enormous texts because books were scarce and cost as much as a farm. A single mistake in recitation could get you mocked, punished, or publicly corrected by your master. Lectures happened at dawn because artificial lighting was expensive. Students sat on cold floors, not benches. They copied notes on wax tablets, scraping them smooth after each lesson to reuse the surface. And remember, all lectures were in Latin. Not conversational Latin, academic Latin. If you didn't understand, that was your fault. And if you fell asleep, well, some masters kept sticks for a reason. Learning wasn't the calm pursuit of knowledge, it was survival. You had to memorize texts, word for word. You had to debate publicly, sometimes in front of hundreds, while your opponents tried to humiliate you. You had to answer complex questions instantly, without notes, without preparation, and without showing fear. And all of this led to the most terrifying part of medieval academia, the examination. But we'll get to that soon. Trust me, it's worth waiting for. Before we enter that trial by fire, we need to talk about something even stranger. How medieval students actually paid for all this. And how their financial desperation shaped university life in ways we rarely discuss. Modern students complain about tuition, but medieval students paid for lodging, heating, food, ink, parchment, candles, clothing, lectures, examination fees. And because universities could fine professors, professors could also fine students. Yes, fines were a thing. Late to class? Fine. Disruptive? Fine. Botched Latin recitation? Fine. Students spent so much money that many resorted to begging, borrowing, pawning clothes, gambling, taking odd jobs, or occasionally committing petty theft. More than a few scholars dropped out not because they failed academically, but because they simply ran out of cash. Now imagine juggling that. Debt, hunger, housing instability, while preparing for the most brutal exam system in Western history. Let's open that door now. You've seen stressful finals, but nothing in modern academia compares to the medieval exam system. First, you weren't tested on what you studied last week. You were tested on everything. Years of material, entire books, all of it stored in your mind. Second, the exam was oral, public, and adversarial. You stood before a panel of masters who grilled you relentlessly. Rapid-fire questions, trick questions, philosophical traps, logic puzzles, theological dilemmas. They weren't trying to help you succeed. Their job was to break you, to prove whether your learning was real, deep, and internalized. You couldn't reference notes, you couldn't pause to think, you couldn't ask for clarification. You had to speak perfect Latin, instantly, no matter what they threw at you. Some students fainted, others cried. Chroniclers describe candidates trembling so violently they could barely stand upright. And if you failed? No degree, no career, years of your life gone. If you passed, well, that didn't guarantee success either. But it did mean you survived something few others could. But here's the thing. Everything we imagine about medieval universities, every tidy illustration in a textbook, every polite classroom scene, falls apart the moment you step inside the real experience. And maybe this is where we should address a few myths, because the truth isn't just different. It's stranger. Myth number 1. Medieval universities were quiet, disciplined places of learning. Reality couldn't be further from that image. Imagine trying to study while a crowd of drunken scholars argues theology at the top of their lungs outside your window at 2 a.m. Or walking to class past a group of students fencing with live blades because they wanted to settle a disagreement academically. Professors often complained that lectures were interrupted by brawling students, vendors shouting in the streets, stray pigs wandering into classrooms, fights breaking out over seating. One Paris professor even wrote that teaching felt like attempting to pour knowledge into a cauldron already boiling over. So no, these places were never quiet. They were intellectual battlegrounds wrapped in constant chaos. And the crazier part, most students wouldn't have had it any other way. Myth number 2. Medieval students were obedient young men preparing for respectable professions. The truth is that medieval university students had a reputation so bad, entire cities passed laws specifically to control them. A bishop in the 13th century France described students as loud, proud, armed, and dangerously idle. Many arrived at university as teenagers, suddenly given legal immunity, freedom from local courts, time on their hands, stipends from home, access to alcohol, and a city full of people who hated them. It was the perfect recipe for disaster. In Bologna, students once seized a street vendor's cart because he overcharged them for fruit. and rolled it through town like a victory trophy. In Oxford, bands of students formed rival factions and patrolled neighbourhoods like miniature militias. One chronicler simply called them wolves among sheep. Respectable? Yes. On paper. In reality, they were more like rowdy guild apprentices with textbooks. Myth number 3. Everyone at a medieval university studied the same basic subjects. This one is partially true, but dangerously oversimplified. Sure, every student began with the liberal arts, but what they actually learned depended heavily on the master teaching them. One master might turn logic into a thrilling mental duel, challenging students with riddles that bordered on philosophy's version of gladiator combat. Another might spend entire lectures reading silently while students copied every word. Some were beloved, some were despised, some frankly were incompetent. And then there were the rockstar masters, think medieval celebrity professors, who drew hundreds of students simply because they were mesmerizing speakers. When they lectured, crowds stood in the hallways, pressed against the doors, even climbed onto rafters just to hear a few lines. Knowledge wasn't standardized, it was personality-driven, unpredictable, and sometimes bizarre. One Paris master was so obsessed with Aristotle that he banned students from reading anything else. Another insisted students memorize definitions backward to strengthen the memory. So no, education wasn't tidy, it was an academic Wild West. Myth number 4. Medieval degrees were just old-fashioned versions of modern ones. Oh, if only it were that simple. Getting a degree in the Middle Ages wasn't a matter of passing exams, it was a public performance, a social trial, and a test of endurance wrapped together. To earn a master's degree, you had to publicly debate anyone who challenged you. Students, professors, or complete strangers wandering in from the street. And they wouldn't go easy on you. They tried to humiliate you, confuse you, corner you logically, break your composure. A graduation exam could last hours, sometimes days. One student famously fainted mid-debate from sheer exhaustion. Another accidentally argued himself into heresy and had to spend months defending his innocence. A medieval degree wasn't proof you had knowledge, it was proof you could survive a verbal knife fight. Myth number 5. Medieval universities were respected institutions everyone admired. Not even close. Universities were often seen as nuisances, economic drains, sources of trouble, magnets for crime, havens for untouchable, law-resistant youth. Shopkeepers complained. Tavern owners complained. Priests complained. Even city guards dreaded dealing with students because they knew arresting a scholar could spark a riot. And yet, the same towns that resented universities also depended on them. Students brought money, prestige, and cultural status. Cities hated them and needed them simultaneously. That tension shaped medieval urban life in ways we still see today. And here's the twist: medieval universities didn't survive because cities embraced them. They survived because students and masters refused to let them disappear. Now for the twist. Despite the chaos, the violence, the hunger, and the emotional strain, these medieval universities accomplished something extraordinary. They built the framework of modern education. These rowdy, unpredictable, occasionally dangerous institutions created degree systems, academic faculties, standardized curricula, legal protections for scholars, philosophical traditions, scientific methodologies. Modern academia stands on their shoulders, shaky, bruised shoulders, but shoulders nonetheless.